realities.
But would you say with with Oriental Orthodox, do you affirm some type of divine simplicity, or you do affirm some type of divine simplicity? Okay. With divine simplicity, you're basically saying that God's love is God's anger. When it comes down to
We're affirming a formal distinction in how they're applied to other things, but they're really the same. Yeah.
Okay, so they're really the same. So God's love is God's anger.
So God's wrath would just be a display of His justice.
Okay.
Right? So that would still be love.
So the issue here is when we can wrap up the conversation quick because I don't want to keep you too long. But when the issue is when you are doing that, and we as Muslims, Sunni Muslims, I'm Sunni. So, yeah, sure. So the reason we can't take divine simplicity from an Islamic position, I'm not sure if you're aware why, we have distinct names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. So we have like Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Hay, Al-Qayyum. So to say that all of these names and all of these attributes are the same, that is inconsistent from a Muslim position because they have clearly been distinguished in the Quran.
How do you affirm a composition?
So I'm just mentioning the reason that we don't believe, sure, there have been people from the Islamic tradition that have affirmed divine simplicity from the Islamic tradition. So for example, the philosophers, the Falsafiyya, the Mu'tazilites and the Shia also affirm some type of divine simplicity. But the reason that there's plenty of reasons. First of all, I mentioned from the Quran and from the Sunnah, we have distinct names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another reason you can give, for example, is if you affirm that God's love and God's anger are the same thing, do I have the ability to give, can I give a loving action to you, or I can be loving towards you and I can also be angry towards you, right? I have the free will to choose between being loving and being angry. Yeah, sure. So I have free will, right? I have free will to be angry or to be loving towards you. If you're affirming divine simplicity, if God's love is God's anger, He doesn't have free will. You are limiting your concept of God to not having free will, because can God be loving and not angry towards you? Can God be loving and not angry towards you? But then God's love is God's anger.
No, that doesn't.
Why not?
Again, because there's a formal distinction between these things and how we receive them, right? So if we're talking about energies and how we receive stuff, that would be according to us, not according to God's energy, right? God's energy would be the same but applicable differently to different situations. For example, if you sin, for example, God will be just and He will have wrath for you. So that's out of His love for you, again. Because He loves you, He treats you firmly.
But can He choose to just selectively apply His wrath and not His anger? And not His love, sorry.
His application of His wrath is His application of love. He is all loving by definition, so He cannot cease to love you. It's impossible. When He's being wrathful, He is being loving in that wrath. That wrath is just how you've received it because you are a sinner. I'm not obviously.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. But for me, I know you mentioned you're not too comfortable talking about metaphysics. I'm not either.
No, I don't mind metaphysics. I don't like essence energy.
Essence energy, yes. I won't dwell on it too long. Sure. So for me, that's the reason, because you also said that God, whenever He is applying His wrath, He has to simultaneously apply His anger. He has to simultaneously apply His love.
Well, His wrath is.
Whereas we, as Sunni Muslims, we have a distinction between God's love and God's anger. And God has the free will to choose what He wants to do, because He's God at the end of the day. He's not limited by having, divine simplicity. It all comes back to every action and every attribute is the same, right? So it can kind of go into a modal collapse as well, which is not what I'm going to go into. Because if everything is the same, then the act of creation is also equivalent to His act of love. And then that also entails that God's creation is an eternal thing. So creation is eternal.
No, it doesn't. Because again, we're affirming a formal essence energy distinction. This would be secondary intent. And secondary intent comes out of this love. But for example, if I can love everything eternally, I can still do something because I'm loving, right? So we can still have an eternal will without those things being actual. You can still have an eternal will and actions being actualized in temporal space.
But when God is loving something, sure.
How do you define composition?
Composition is where if you take something that subsists of parts, right? And parts are where something can exist on its own, separate from the composite.
That's not the definition of a part.
So, I mean, part you can define in different ways. In English language, you can define parts in many ways.
The metaphysical definition of a part would be that it has self-existence. For example, you can have soul and body.
Yeah, but I don't hold myself to metaphysics, but sure.
But this is the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
If you're affirming distinct realities and things that are really distinct from the essence of God that still are under the
But they're not wholly separate to God's
but
essence.
it doesn't matter.
And they're not wholly...
There's a real distinction and real non-identity between them. If you're affirming a real distinction and real non-identity between constituents of God, you're affirming a composite God. And further than that, the problem with the composite God is for anything to come into composition, it must be composed by something else. So then you're saying God is not the first cause and there's another cause. But you would have to affirm the metaphysics.
No, why?
Because I've gone through.
Sure. I'm a bit slow on philosophy, so yeah, no, I understand. It's not my specialty, so I'm happy to learn. Hi, man. Nice to meet you.
So if you're affirming distinct realities that make up one thing, that would
No, but we don't. When we say they don't make up, that's the thing. Like, make up means like that they're distinct parts that add to one thing, right?
But again, they're distinct.
If I say something is a part of you and something is attributed to you, to something that is attributed to you always means something is a part of you.
Attribution is a different thing.
Exactly. So the word attribute comes from the word attribution. So that's why parts and attributes are not exactly the same thing.
But this is a different thing. For example, when you're saying you don't say there's non-identity. For example, you don't say there's non-identity between my skin and the color of my skin, right? The color of my skin would be an attribute of my skin. There's a difference. My hand, there's non-identity between my hand and my foot. That's a real non-identity there, and those are parts of my body.
Sure.
The same way, if you have non-identity and real distinction.
Non-identity and real distinction, right?
Yeah.
So when you as an Orthodox, when you believe the essence is separate from God's energies.
Separate is wrong.
Okay, distinct. The energy.
You affirm a formal distinction.
You affirm a formal distinction. And you mentioned non-identity, so there's non-identity there, and then what?
No. I was talking about if you're going to say parts, right?
Yeah.
That would be non-identity, because that would be a real distinction between two things, right? We can still affirm to some extent that his essence is his essence. His energies are his essence, right?
So you can affirm that his essence is his energy
His
without
energies
distinction.
are his essence in relation to creation, how we receive.
But they're distinct things. So how can you
They're
say?
formally distinct. This is what a formal distinction. It wouldn't be a real distinction.
But what is a formal distinction? Because I find like a lot of these, no disrespect, but like I find like a lot of these definitions in Christianity are applied only in Christianity. They don't really exist outside of the realm of Christianity. I'm not sure if this is one of them.
Having metaphysical terms that only exist in Christianity doesn't make them incorrect.
But it does. But
It doesn't.
I'm not necessarily saying that, but I'm saying like it just seems a bit like when you're inventing your own definitions for your own theology, it does seem a bit off, right?
For example, we've got 2,000 years of theology.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
You can't take that because, of course, for your God, for example, you're going to make up terms. There are terms in Islam that are not applicable in any other.
Sure. But we're talking about metaphysical terms, right?
But that's
You guys understand, you guys know what
But-
it is.
But we have these metaphysical terms because Platonism and Aristotle weren't even they weren't even.
But can I ask you about one of these metaphysical terms? So, like for example, you mentioned about the Trinity, right?
Yeah.
And the metaphysics around that. So, I mentioned this last week, and no worries if you're not familiar, but you watched the video, right? So, it kind of ties in with the terminology because if Jesus was tempted to sin, and we all agree that Jesus was tempted to sin. I'm not saying he succumbed to the sin. I'm simply saying he was tempted to sin, and it's very clear.
Tempted means, for example, if let's say you're really hungry, right?
Sure.
And I put food in front of you, I'm tempted you.
Yeah.
Whether or not you actually feel the emotion of temptation, you might not even pay attention. It might not even cross your mind. But I am tempting you.
Yeah.
I am tempting you. You're not being tempted, I'm tempting you.
Sure.
And that's the difference.
But this is the thing, right? So, what was mentioned in that video was, and what you guys are mentioning to me now is an external temptation, right?
Yeah.
That I'm being externally tempted. this definition of external temptation doesn't exist outside the Christian tradition. It doesn't. It doesn't. The way that you understand
I
it.
mean, I think everyone has used it. If for example,
He can tempt me to do something, but I won't.
Succumb to it.
I can tempt you. Oh, come, let's go to the club.
Yeah.
He has no even thought of crossing his mind of going to the club.
But this is-
I can be like, oh, I'm gonna tempt you to go to the club. That doesn't mean.
But you see, this is where it kind of falls apart. And I understand it's kind of hard to follow this, so I don't want to let me know if you're struggling or if it's hard to keep up. But like, say, if I tempt this wall to move towards us, that wall cannot be tempted to move towards us because it doesn't have a capacity within itself to be tempted.
That's just a falsehood.
It's irrational. It's irrational for me to say to the wall. It's irrational for me to say to you guys, I tempted the wall to come towards us,
Let me
right?
ask you this.
Because the wall itself.
Let me ask you this, right?
The wall is not irrational.
Let me ask you.
Yeah, sure.
Can you be mean to a wall?
Can I be mean to a wall?
Yeah.
No.
But can you be mean to a person?
You be mean to a person, yes.
Does that mean that person has to receive that meanness?
So,
Does that mean that person has to receive that meanness?
no.
Okay, so again, you can't do
No, but
something. Okay, hold on. You
Sorry,
can't do
sorry.
something to a
Yeah.
wall, but you can do something to a person which they don't receive. So again, it's the same thing. I can be mean to Manuel behind his back.
Sorry.
He will never hear us.
It depends on the situation, right? So, like, for example, if I'm mean towards you,
Yeah.
and you don't receive it as being mean, but he does receive it as being mean,
Yeah.
then there is a situation where I was mean to you, right?
Yeah, but you can be mean to me. Like you can just say it to another person. I'm not even listening. You're still doing an action to me. Right?
Okay, no.
Again,
let me.
you're
Yeah,
still doing an action to me which is implausible to do to an irrational object, right?
yeah.
And I am not receiving that action in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't.
But then,
change.
okay, then I'm
the
not
same
tempting you.
thing-
Then I'm not tempting you to do that thing.
No. So again,
Then you're not being tempted to do what
yeah,
I'm.
temptation in this regard would just be to try and tempt someone to do something.
Yeah, but okay, I'll just clarify my position and let me know, right, if I'm saying anything wrong. I'm not trying to catch you guys out. I'm just trying to explain. Okay, if I am to tempt someone to do something, they must have some capacity within them to be susceptible to that to the thing that they're being tempted to do. So if I'm tempting someone to sin, they must have something within themselves that has the ability to do that sin. Whether or not they do that sin or whether they don't do that sin, that doesn't matter. They must have something within them that has the capacity to respond to what I'm tempting them to do.
Yeah, if we said there wasn't that capacity to do something, then we wouldn't be denying
Then-
free will, right?
No,
But hold
if
on,
there
hold on,
wasn't,
hold on.
yeah, sure.
But the acceptance of free will of Christ is not saying that he's perfect, right?
Yeah.
He perfectly chooses with his free will to do perfect good. So this is not any kind of thing. It's two different things.
Sure.
You're saying free will,
Yeah.
and then you're saying perfection. If you're going to mix up free will and imperfection, then you're affirming that God's imperfect.
Look, I'm not criticizing the perfection. I'm not criticizing the perfection because he chose the right decision, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that he had a choice in the first place shows that he was tempted, right? Because to be tempted means you have a choice whether to succumb to the temptation or whether to not succumb to this temptation, right? If you have a capacity within yourself to succumb to the temptation, which he had, right? Then that means he's not God because it doesn't.
That doesn't make sense because again, hold on.
Maybe
So you're saying there's a capacity to be tempted.
Yeah.
That's just on the basis of free will. So hold on. You were just talking about free will.
a capacity to be tempted to do the thing that is being proposed.
Again, temptation doesn't mean that you have the capacity to be tempted. It means you have the capacity to do the things that you're being tempted.
Yeah, exactly.
You have
So
the-
wait, just sorry,
hold on,
just
hold on.
repeat what you said slowly. Repeat what you said slowly,
You have
because
the
then
capacity to do the thing that you're being
tempted to do. So if he,
hold on.
yeah, okay.
Let me continue on this.
Okay, sure.
If you have the capacity to do the thing, for example, Christ is in a human body.
Yeah.
He has the capacity to go and punch John the Baptist.
Sure.
God forbid.
God forbid.
He has the capacity to do that. That is a possible thing he can do.
Yeah.
He chooses with his free will, which is perfect, being good,
Yeah.
not to do that.
Yeah.
God, the same way, has the capacity to kill all humans on earth.
Sure.
That is not befitting his majesty nor his perfection, so he would never do it. However, he has the capacity to do that. And here's the point there. You have the capacity to do that thing that you're being tempted to do. That does not mean that you're going to do that. Nor does that mean that he's not going.
Okay. Thank you for that. So you said he had the capacity to do the thing that he was tempted to do. He was being tempted by Satan to sin, right? what sin is going against God's will.
Yeah.
So if he has the capacity to sin, he has the capacity to go against God's will. If he's God and he has the capacity to go against God's will, then he's not God.
Again, so we're talking about physical capacity. For example, as I said, that's why I use the position of
Sure.
We're not saying he has any other will to do anything else. That was the whole point. He doesn't have a will to do anything else. He does not will to do anything but the perfect. But the point was he has the physical and mental capacity to complete this action. If he wills to do that, that's a whole other thing. He has the exact same will as God, so he would never do such a thing.
No, but you just said he has the possibility to do that. So you can't say he never did.
Again, we're talking about a physical possibility.
But I mean,
so
you,
for example,
do you affirm?
I can
yeah,
say
sure.
you have a possibility
Yeah.
to go and kick all these people in the past, right? Kick them in the head. You're never gonna do it.
I mean,
it's
I've been working my taekwondo.
but even more so, you're never gonna do that because it's not your will, right? God's will being so concrete and unchanging, it would never be Christ's will. But his physical body, there is the capacity there with a physical shape to do these sins. For example, I can walk off a cliff. That's a physical capacity. That's completely against my will, and even more so with God when his will is eternal and unchanging. So there's no real mental capacity that he's actually going to do that.
Sure.
But he is physically able to do that.
Sure. The thing is, you affirm like hypostatic union, right?
Yeah.
So you affirm that the human nature and the divine nature are one. Is that, am I got that wrong?
So
Or?
we're from the Oriental Orthodox Church.
Okay.
We would affirm a composition of two natures, becoming one nature. That would be divino human nature.
But anything Christ would do in reality would also be his divine will doing that thing, right?
Yeah, because there would be one principle.
So
in
when
fact, we would affirm one theandric will.
Okay. So when you're saying that you affirm one will, so when he has the capacity to do that thing, to go against God, God's will has the capacity to go against God. And God's will has the capacity to go against God's will.
So again, you're misinterpreting what I said.
Sure.
I said he has the physical capacity.
Yeah.
I said this is not his will, it never is his will, and he doesn't have the capacity insofar as mental capacity to do it, because he wouldn't go against his will. It's impossible. For God, it's
God to go
unchanging
against-
will,
yeah.
but he has his own physical body has the capacity to clench his fist, to do all these things. This is a capacity, a thing that is possible, right?
Okay. I feel like we've established both our points, and I really
that
understand.
wouldn't be against, that wouldn't be meaning he can go against his will. No, we're not saying that. We're saying his body has a physical capacity to complete these actions.
And yeah, no, I mean, I need to head, guys. So, but I really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. What was your name? Connor.
Actually, never mind.
No, so yeah, whatever. Nice to meet you, bro. Yeah, I'll give you guys a gift actually, because that was a nice conversation. I mean, I don't know how much you guys have looked into Islam, but we didn't really get a chance to talk about that. But have you guys looked into Islam, or is it more like you're just from the?
Not really.
Not really. No, I mean, I really encourage you guys to study the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's, for us as like Muslims, we believe he's like the perfect example to humankind, right? And we believe he is the most like influential man. I mean, I'm sure you both agree that he was the most influential man after Isa alayhi salam, which we believe is, yeah, in terms of like the impact he's had on the world, in terms of,
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
right? So I feel like if he is someone that's so influential, it's kind of the onus is on you guys to like look into him, look into his character.
The same about Christianity.
Yeah, sure. And I do look into I have looked into.
The thing is with me, with Islam, it
I don't think I've got the book that I wanted to get, but I'll look anyway.
seems like a purely organic religion.
Why'd you say that?
Because I see, for example, the Quran taking stuff that's blatantly from Syriac manuscripts, taking stuff from about infancy, Gospel of Thomas, etc.
Yeah.
I see all these different things that kind of make the Quran like a composite book of things that would have been widely available in the Arabian.
I'd love to. I'd actually.
Is this something? Yeah, I thought you guys might be interested because you're Orthodox, right? So you guys are interested in the traditions, and this is a book that talks about like the Islamic traditions and how there's a lot of linkage there with the Old Testament, and in terms of like the Jewish traditions pre the temple destruction. So yeah, if that's something, and I mean this is another book. It's a really good book. It's called Zealot. So it's by Reza Aslan, who Sorry?
What's it about?
It's about, he takes a very historical approach to the figure of Isa alayhi salam.
Oh yes, please.
So yeah, this is a very interesting book. I mean, yeah, you guys feel free to share the books, but I thought I'd gift you guys something for a nice conversation. It was a nice conversation, I think. And this is my brother Idris over here, who, yeah. No worries, guys. Yeah, just both of them. So, yeah.
I'll give these back to you.
Nah, don't worry, man. Don't worry. Keep them if you want. Yeah, sure. Maybe this one, if we catch each other, just let me know where the bookmarks were. But, but yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. Nice speaking. Yeah, some man. Yeah, good man.
Is that Manchester United?
No, it's Bayern Munich. Yeah. So, yeah. So, Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. We had a really nice discussion with these two Oriental Orthodox Christians. It's not often we come across Oriental Orthodox Christians in the park. Usually, if they are Orthodox, they're from the Eastern Orthodox tradition. We just covered a few topics that they wanted to raise with me about a prior discussion I had. I'm not repping this. Yeah. So we talked about metaphysics and philosophy, and as a Sunni Muslim, as an Athari Muslim, I don't like to delve into these topics, but I delved where I could, where it was appropriate, and mentioned bila kayf on certain matters. We talked about the fact that in the Bible it mentions Isa alayhi salam, according to them, was tempted in the desert. I mentioned that if Isa alayhi salam was tempted according to them, he had a capacity within himself to succumb to that temptation. Otherwise, you can't tempt that thing or that person. So if he had a capacity within himself to be tempted by the thing he's being tempted to do, that means he was, and it's very clear in the Bible, he was tempted to sin. So if he was being tempted to sin, he was being tempted to go against God's will. If he has a capacity within himself to go against God's will, that means he cannot be God, because God and God's will cannot have a capacity within it to go against itself. So we established that. I handed them a couple of books which I recommend to you all. One is Divine Diversity, which is by Rabbi Ben Abrahamson, which talks about the Islamic tradition and how there's a lot of linkages there with the Old Testament tradition. And I also handed him a book on another historical book called Zealot, which is a very good book. I'd recommend if you're looking for a historical approach to the figure of Isa alayhi salam. So thanks all for joining, and inshallah I'll catch you all soon. Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, all good. Thanks, man. Thank you.